Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Red Lettuce. We are with a very special guest, Ryan Wentz. He is a queer anti-imperialist comrade, and we are very excited for him to be with us tonight. Ryan, welcome to the Red Lettuce.
Thanks so much for having me.
We want to talk to you about homonormativity, homonationalism, and pinkwashing. And I know those are very highly academic terms. So maybe you can break those down for us before we get into it a little bit deeper, those three things.
Yeah, so homonationalism is, I think, what we see most often in the political discourse in the US. It was coined by an academic named Jasbir Puar, and a piece called The Terrorist Assemblages, Homonationalism in Queer Times. And basically, what homonationalism is, the US empire requires that like gay and queer folks, it uses gay and queer folks, trans folks to deploy nationalism. And as Puar says, insofar as these perverse bodies reiterate heterosexuality as the norm, but also because certain domesticated homosexual bodies provide ammunition to reinforce nationalist projects. So, you see it with the US and also I'm sure we'll talk about Israel, most notably, just queer and trans folks being used to cover up these crimes that both countries are committing on a daily basis. Pinkwashing is one example of homonationalism. It's a manifestation, as Puar puts it, because unlike pinkwashing, homonationalism is not a state practice, but just a historical convergence of state practices, as she puts it, and transnational circuits of queer commodity culture and human rights paradigms, and broader global phenomena such as the increasing entrenchment of Islamophobia. So pinkwashing is the strategy that's used most often to, that represents homonationalism more broadly. And that's, putting, priding yourself on having a military that's open to queer and trans people, even though obviously we know that that changed very recently. The US acts as if that's been the case for a really long time and tries to make it seem like the US military isn't a good place for queer and trans people. You see that pinkwashing at pride parades when the US military marches in these corporate pride parades. That's pinkwashing. Israel using Tel Aviv film festivals to bring, funded by the Israeli state, to bring international tourists, particularly queer and trans tourists, to the apartheid state, to, just go to an LGBTQ film festival. But really what it does is it serves as like a propaganda trip to make it seem as if this country is more open than it is in reality. Obviously, queer and trans Palestinians are not exempt from the apartheid that all Palestinians live under.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, great. That's an excellent breakdown of those terms. Maybe we can also get into like what institutions deploy homonationalism and how is it used to further capitalist imperialism, and when did this really begin and what purpose does it serve?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting quote from Puar. I just keep quoting her because she has some really insightful comments. But so she says that the neoliberal accommodationist economic structure, and I can break this down after because I know it's a lot of big words, engenders niche marketing of various ethnic and minoritized groups, normalizing the production of, for example, a gay and lesbian tourism industry built on the discursive distinction between gay-friendly and not gay-friendly destinations. So, when it comes to Israel, they constantly when I talk about like justice and liberation for Palestinians to Zionists, they tell me to go to Gaza or go to Iran,
Right.
and see how I'll be treated there. But really, it is just a way that they can use my identity to cover up the crimes that they commit. And do you really think that there's queer and trans Palestinians, right? Checkpoints don't discriminate. But do you really think that Palestinian culture, Palestinian civil society will be able to be like super quote unquote progressive when it's fighting this front against colonialism? And when, as I'm sure we'll get into later, colonialism, like queer and transphobia was imposed by these colonial projects. So it's just kind of a ridiculous talking point. But yeah, so with a lot of like gay tourism, you see like the homonationalist manifestation of pinkwashing. When I don't know if you see like on Grindr and Tinder, there's like ads for Tel Aviv Pride,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like saying go on this trip to this spectacular gay quote unquote mecca, which is like especially offensive.
So offensive.
But yeah, it's always it like we've seen it particularly in this post 9/11 era, used constantly to demonize Muslim majority societies and Middle Eastern countries. And it's just really grotesque because it shows that these people who are trying to weaponize which LGBTQ people are deserve our solidarity don't give a shit about queer and trans people in these societies, living under Israeli occupation in Palestine or living in the crosshairs of US imperialism in Iran. And yeah, it's also really perverse to see them act as if, as I said before, the military, the US military, the like most genocidal force on the planet, has always been open to us, when we know that that's not the case. We know that our queer and trans siblings across the world suffer under the boot of US militarism. And it's just, it's gross to see, like for instance, the San Diego Pride March in 2011 was the first Pride March to have the US military in a specific like contingent officially marching in the parade.
Ew, that's so
And
gross.
yeah, it's really gross, and it just, that does not make me feel like we're working towards queer and trans liberation. That makes me feel like we're in this trap where we're being used as like tokens in this imperialist game.
Yeah, we're like, it's like an assimilationist way of like making us assimilate to how things are, and that goes totally against the whole liberationist praxis.
Absolutely. And another great quote that about the way in which we see, you know, what countries are considered LGBTQ friendly, like always come back to this Islamophobic undercurrent.
Yeah.
She writes that pinkwashing works in part by tapping into the discursive and structural circuits produced by US and European crusades against the spectral threat of radical Islam or Islamofascism. And I just feel like I'm constantly being met with that reaction when I simply advocate against US imperialism in that region, just being a queer person, you know? It's always, well, why would you care about that? They would throw you off a roof. And it's like, okay, first of all, that whole throw you off a roof narrative comes from Saudi Arabia, which is one of the US's closest allies. And then also that saying something as dismissive and crass as that, does not convince me that you actually care about LGBTQ folks in Saudi Arabia or in Iran or Gaza, wherever.
Right.
Liberals seem very unaware of the horrific relationship we have with Saudi Arabia. I find it really, really interesting that almost in anything you can like connect U.S. foreign policy, their ulterior motives with Saudi Arabia, and I remember like learning about those things and trying to figure out if I was being Islamophobic or not. Every time, you know, you bring up those issues of, yeah, maybe we shouldn't, I don't know, go to nuclear war with Iran, and we should talk about our own relationship with this extremely homophobic country that helps kill people all over the region with the weapons we give them, including gay people, including trans people. And they're always like, oh, how could you support the Iranian government? And I like have never said that.
Yeah, I also just think that we can't discount how big of a role capitalism plays in this, in the sense that, you know, who is constantly held up in the US as someone who, like a queer person who really made it. I'm just thinking like Tim Cook is always used by these like neoliberal outlets as like, oh, look at this gay man who's like super powerful. And on that note, Tim Cook was one of the people who met with Mohammed bin Salman when he came to the US on his PR tour, you know, 2 years ago or whatever, in the midst of the total destruction of Yemen, which is still going on today. Mm-hmm. And while, you know, the Saudi monarchy continues to totally oppress queer and trans people, it shows how little Tim Cook and people like him care about people in Saudi Arabia, queer and trans people in Saudi Arabia. It shows the limits to their solidarity, and if you can even call it solidarity. And same with Pete Buttigieg, you know, he's such a perfect example of this like homo-nationalist face who just licks the boots of these like corporations that are totally oppressive to you know, poor working class queer and trans folks who served in the military in Afghanistan, who worked with McKinsey in Iraq. And I can just tell you with like 100% of my heart that I know that none of those things that he has done have been good for queer and trans people all around the world. So it's just sick to see his candidacy lifted up as if it's some accomplishment for our community.
I know it's like a disgrace. Like this is the guy that's gonna be like written in history as the first openly gay person to run for the presidency, and with a record like that, it's such a slap in the face to our community, because he's literally the face of like homonormativity and homonationalism.
Yep.
And but that's why he was chosen, because it fits so well within the U.S. imperialism, and like it's a great brand for U.S. imperialism.
Absolutely. And I mean, he was pulling. Sorry, go for it.
Sorry. No, I found that the trouble I had talking about homonationalism and Pete Buttigieg was people would say, "Oh, he's not gay enough for you," like just stupid shit like that just made no sense, and was like, it has nothing to do with his sexuality and everything to do with how he uses his sexuality and what he's doing here. Like, I don't care if he's gay. I care if he wants to stop bombing people, which I don't fucking believe he wants to stop blowing people up.
Of course
He doesn't.
No, Medicare for all who want it. What kind of bullshit is that? Like, drone bombs for those who want it. Like I just
Absolutely.
It's drone bombs with a rainbow flag on it, and
yeah.
it just this totally plays into this identity reductionism that's so prevalent here, especially within like homonormative circles. It's just like, oh, he's gay, that's it. That's all I need to know. And like anything like policy wise, I don't really care. He's gay, he's white and gay, and that's all I need to know. It's all about this like identity reductionism, and I think it's so destructive.
They want that self-validation. They want to see, they're like, oh, a gay president. Oh, I'm validated in my identity, and now homophobia is canceled in my country. Like that's
right. Even
that's,
though
exactly.
even though in 29 states here there's conversion therapy is allowed.
And doesn't this just show how liberals are, they don't focus on anything substantive. They just fall for
all surface.
Yeah, everything at the surface. You know, Hillary was a woman. If you don't vote for Hillary, you're misogynistic.
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just people. You see it right now. It's particularly disgusting watching everyone throw out names for like Black women VP picks for Biden. Like, so that's really how much the Democratic Party cares about Black women. They're just trying to prop one up, so to totally pander, but they're not doing anything for Black women. Black women need healthcare. Black women need childcare. Black women need so many things that the Democratic Party will never give them. So it's super upsetting. And yeah, what you were saying about
why wouldn't they give them those things? Why? Is it because the Democrats are terrible?
It's just because they have the same economic interests and imperialist interests as the Republicans. They're part of the same ruling class.
Ruling class, yeah. They're just different flavors, but it's the same thing. They serve the capitalist class and not us.
But they've got the mask on, so
exactly.
They want to get rid of Donald Trump so that they can put the mask back on neoliberalism
put
and
a pretty face back on, like Obama. You kind of touched on this earlier, but I want to go into a little more deeper. How are pinkwashing and homonationalism used to manufacture consent for apartheid states like the U.S. empire and the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine? And how does it play into Islamophobia and racism?
Yeah. So I actually, the reason I got into Palestine solidarity stuff was by pinkwashing. I like hate to admit this, but I studied abroad at Tel Aviv University in college when I was like a neoliberal. And I had just heard, well, I hate cold weather, and I had heard that that Tel Aviv was super LGBTQ friendly, and like there's nightclubs and bars, and they really sell it. And everyone at the time who I was around was just saying like, oh yeah, I've been there, it's great. Like they're calling it Startup Nation. It's like Silicon Valley, which is where I'm from, which is super, super horrible. And I quickly realized that everyone that I was in a program with, the study abroad program, was incredibly racist, like people I'd never been around. And we're saying like the N-word, and we're saying that Arabs are the cause of all problems in the world, just saying these like really, really heinous things. And I was like, well, why would there be a program of 200 people and literally like all of them are so rapidly racist? And then I was like, well, where am I? Like, I really didn't know that much, and I should have obviously done way more research before I went and like, observed the call to boycott Israel. But I didn't know about that at the time. And so I just was there for 6 months, and I went to the Pride Parade and was just so disgusted seeing how Israel uses queer and trans struggles to cover up the crimes that they're committing against Palestinians. I went back and did some work on the ground in Palestine, and was just horrified seeing what the $3.8 billion of military aid a year that the US gives to Israel, what that does and what it upholds. But so then I really started digging as to like, why is this being marketed so hard to queer and trans people? When I was there, I was on Grindr and I like had a Free Palestine little sticker in my photo, and I got banned from Grindr, and I'm still banned from it, and have been for like 2 years. So,
but yeah, I heard you talk about this on Media Roots Radio, Abby Martin and Robbie Martin's show. And maybe you should also say like the creator of Grindr is Israeli, right?
Israeli, yeah, exactly. And obviously they're getting a lot of, I mean, they are advertising like Tel Aviv Pride and shit. But as it relates to Brand Israel, which is the marketing scheme that Israel created to whitewash its settler colonial crimes against Palestinians. They dumped millions and millions of dollars into Tel Aviv, trying to brand it as an international gay vacation destination starting in 2009, $90 million, to support the tourism ministry and Israel's overseas consulates, financing for pro-Israeli movie screenings at lesbian and gay film festivals in the US. And this was actually in response to a 2009 brand perception index taken among, that listed all of the countries in the world, 200 of them, ranking how, like, what their brands were, or how their brand was holding up in the eyes of internationals. And Israel was behind North Korea, Cuba, and Yemen, which are, like 3 Western adversaries that constantly are demonized. So obviously they knew that that they had some work to do. And that same year, the Zionist organization Stand With Us, which gets funding from the Israeli government, told the Jerusalem Post that they were undertaking a campaign to, quote, improve Israel's image through the gay community in Israel. The foreign ministry told the publication Ynet that they would be sponsoring a gay Olympics delegation to, quote, help show to the world Israel's liberal and diverse face. And just, that's in response to this brand perception index. That's in response to the 2008 massacre on Gaza, that just the ongoing massacres that Israel's committing in Gaza and in the West Bank. They're clearly using LGBTQ culture to just cover up what they're doing. In 2010, Brand Israel launched Israeli Pride Month in San Francisco. It wasn't an organic expression of queer folks living in San Francisco, but it was totally administered and backed by the Israeli government. So they're like astroturfed things happening in other countries that makes people, particularly like liberal LGBTQ people in the West, think that Israel is this democratic place that is so different from Palestine, because Palestine is full of, backwards gay haters, like homophobes. It's just, it's really, really cynical. And yeah.
No, yeah, and it's just so mind-boggling because I also went to Israel. Unfortunately, I went on the birthright trip in 2010, and that's like when I just came out like a few months before. I was 21 years old, and I thought like, wow, this is such a cool place, so accepting. But like when I started interacting with like on these trips, you have like a rabbi, and then you have like soldiers that are they're there to protect you, and you had like these like people that like, explain to you like what like they just like are the main tour guides, I guess. And I learned pretty quickly that the that place is not queer friendly at all. Like when I would bring up queer issues that concerned me, like in Israel, they would ignore it, or they would say like, you know, you shouldn't come out and all these things. I'm like, I thought this was supposed to be a metropolis. I thought this was supposed to be like
Yep.
very accepting place, and it's not true at all. And a lot of people were really racist and bigoted on our trip, and you know it's just like that whole birthright experience was such a brainwashing. It's just used to brainwash people. They don't show you anything that's going on in the West Bank or in Gaza. They don't go anywhere near there.
Of course not. Yeah.
It's just to erase the whole occupation and make it seem like they're under attack, and that's totally not true.
Yeah.
And it's just funny that you mentioned that, like, people think that Israel's just like democracy when it's really a theocracy. Mm-hmm. They don't even have gay marriage there. They don't allow people who are different races and religion marry there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just mind-blowing.
If you marry a Palestinian and you're Jewish, they like strip you of your citizenship or some shit like that, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And that's not even, we haven't even talked about what Israel does to queer and trans Palestinians. You know, if they find out, they use that to, if the Palestinian person isn't out, they will blackmail them to become informants and turn against their community, which is just so sick, and obviously not something that someone who actually cares about LGBTQ people would ever do. And there are also, it's not to be erased that there are organizations in the West Bank that are led by queer and trans folks advocating for queer and trans liberation and justice. So yeah, queer and trans folks are fighting multiple battles, multiple fronts of a battle against, you know, the Israeli occupation and against the queer and transphobia in their own communities. And obviously the criminal occupation isn't helping people at all. But when I was there also, I was removed from my group chat of like 200 people within like the first week of my program, because I asked people, the whole chat, if anyone wanted to go to a gay bar. And I was like, that was another one of the like moments where it really became clear to me, like, wow, this whole group's MO is like really off. And, you know, they only cared about like queer and trans Zionists, and only if that, it's what homonationalism and pinkwashing are all about, just upholding this nationalist project. And it just so happens that in Israel, it's like one of the most glaringly apparent examples, you know? So yeah, I just, there are queer and trans Palestinians, they matter. We should be listening to them. We should be in solidarity with them, and not this like Zionist regime that's just trying to co-opt everything about our community.
Right, and it's important to point out that queerphobia and transphobia are Western creations, because during the, you know, Ottoman Empire, for example, like it was homosexuality was not criminalized. It didn't become that way until Britain took over and colonized. So I think that's another important thing to point out, is that these are all Western creations.
Absolutely. The gender binary is totally Western. It was just imposed by the West on all of these regions in the global South. And like, I remember a couple of years ago, maybe last year, that something happened in India, like some law was repealed and the West used it as like a way of like head patting, and it was like super condescending. but really that law was created by the British colonial
Yep.
government. So it's like, these Westerners use this to make it seem like they're more civilized or whatever, when really the West has been imposing these constructs on the people that they've been colonizing for centuries.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of reveals how indoctrinated we are and how illiterate people are with history, and how when how Western nations, the colonizers, you know, kind of inflicted this transphobia and homophobia through Christianity too. And it's like, you know, they impose a religion and their practices on indigenous people who were historically always very open to queer identities and multiple genders. And, you know, we're the ones that came in and forced upon these binaries and these, you know, racist and exclusionary social constructs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
And
love that you
yeah,
brought up missionaries too, because I see a lot of, I don't see enough conversation about missionary groups in Africa, or even like with the recent coup in Bolivia with the Christians, the fascists there have like compared indigenous people to Satanism,
yeah,
and there's a lot in there, but there's a lot to unpack there. But that people don't, they just see election fraud and then they're like, oh well, he's got to go because
yep.
he was a fraud, and then the interim government never fucking leaves.
No elections. They're still trying to call the ones off that they're trying to plan in September.
Yeah.
But and this is the US empire, you know, like this is US foreign policy. It is inherently homophobic and transphobic. This is why it's so frustrating and so important that we beat back against the co-optation of like our struggle by the US military, and just by the US state. Like we export these things, you know. We're funding Israeli apartheid, which is obviously bad for queer and trans Palestinians. We're upholding the monarchy in Saudi Arabia. We're trying to do a coup in Venezuela and did a coup in Bolivia, and you know, all of these places. And every single one of these places, the US backed government is worse to queer and trans people. And that's not to say that, you know, every society has a ways to go, but
especially ours.
Yeah, especially ours. And we can't be the ones talking when we're exporting all of this chaos and violence to other places.
Right. I mean, like I said, we still got majority of states, you know, still practice conversion therapy, and you know, it's really unsafe to be openly gay or queer or trans in most states here. Trans murder rates in the U.S. have, you know, gone up, not down. There's more disproportionately queer homeless youth are homeless, especially queer people that are Black and brown or indigenous. They are, you know, more often homeless and without resources, access to healthcare. We got our own issues here. So we got to fix what's going on over here before we can even talk about other places that we've fucked up.
Absolutely.
Colonized.
Yeah.
Mitch, do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit, because you've brought up prisons and stuff as well. And given our current climate, I see a lot of conversation around prison abolition happening again, and I absolutely love that. But for me, pinkwashing and homonationalism are part of a larger phenomenon of neoliberalism co-opting left-wing ideas to justify some ulterior motive. I currently see people trying to redefine prison abolition and police abolition. Do you think prison abolition is vulnerable to a type of pinkwashing or homonationalism? And what ways do you think this could manifest?
Wow, that's a really good question. Do I think that prison abolition could be pinkwashed? Yes. I mean, when we talk about abolition, if we're talking about abolition, that means abolition, you know? But
Mm-hmm.
if someone's trying to, and when I talk about abolition, I mean, I think that abolition has to coincide with, you know, the dismantling of like the capitalist state, and, you know, and of the US military and imperialism. So I think that like the opportunism is like mostly people who are trying to brand themselves as more radical than they actually are, and they're in the end they're advocating for reform. That's because isn't that kind of the whole pattern that we've seen, these radical movements demanding the total abolition or transformation of X, and then these neoliberals co-opt it and they totally water it down, and then it just becomes Y, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
With
I mean, I'm
slavery.
just, yeah, exactly. And just like the movements themselves, like these pride parades, I was like looking through the LA corporate sponsors, and it's like Coca-Cola, Gilead, Amazon. I mean, some of these companies are literally invested in prisons. Airbnb, which you know, rents illegal settlements out in Palestine. Uber, Wells Fargo, Northrop Grumman, which is a weapons company.
What?
So
Yeah.
yeah, so this is what these pride marches stand for. And then
Raytheon.
I was looking at the human rights campaign's corporate partners as well, because they're kind of held up. I think that they're a really good example of what you're talking about, a radical movement, which was, I mean, Human Rights Campaign, if I'm not mistaken, was one of like the first like LGBTQ, I mean, mostly gay, like advocacy organizations, but it rose out of that movement. But then it's just a totally neoliberal corporate shell of an organization, and its partners are American Airlines, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Northrop Grumman, Deloitte, Chevron, Pfizer, BP, Citibank, US Bank, Amazon, Google, Goldman Sachs, IBM, Shell, Morgan Stanley. It's just like the worst corporations in the world coming out of something that obviously came out of something good. And now it's just so far removed from the like radicalism of the first Pride and of the like gay liberation movement, you know? It's just, it's like a joke, really. And these are the Human Rights Campaign, you know, honored, I mentioned this on Media Roots, they honored Jeff Bezos as an ally of the year. So it's just, it's funny, like looking at it's so depressing that it's funny. And I just think that we need to be aware of that, with the with what's happening right now. And I've already seen people, you know, say that there are specific chants like Black trans lives matter, and like for Black trans lives, and people are kind of using just this chant of like all Black lives matter. And I've seen some like radical Black trans folks say like, we want to be named, we don't want just like an all lives matter to like encapsulate everyone, we want like our struggle to be centered here. And I just think, and yeah, we see it with people like trying to get cops to kneel or do the Macarena or whatever, this co-opting of these
The
really
Macarena.
yeah, they were doing that,
National
and
Guard.
it's so depressing because obviously the demands of the movement itself, of these like grassroots organizers on the ground are radical, and then these NGOs get involved, and the NGOs always seem to really disrupt everything and water everything down, confuse people. They're really confusing people. Like, people think a lot of, I mean, I don't want to be too easy on them, but a lot of well-meaning people are like, they think that the Human Rights Campaign is like good, you know? And it's like, well, I don't think any of these companies represents my values or any of my comrades' values. And it's just disturbing that we're this far down the rabbit hole, you know? And we can't let that happen with all of these movements.
Yeah.
That's ran into when I would talk about Tulsi Gabbard's foreign policy a lot, because she'd bring up like Saudi Arabia and she'd bring up nuclear war with Iran and stuff like that. And I was like, finally someone who's kind of speaking my language here. And then they're like, oh, she's so homophobic and blah, blah, blah. But she's got a 100% like approval rating from the HRC, which is a double-edged sword, because you can use that against this argument, but at the same time you're just like, oh, ooh.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
go ahead.
oh no, yeah, because since we're like talking about the Human Rights Campaign, and maybe we can talk about like that in the context of homonormativity and how like that organization uses homonormativity, like how does it promote it, and how does homonormativity play into the ruling ideology of neoliberalism?
Yeah, I mean, it's so assimilationist. It's like the people, obviously, by just looking at the corporate partners, they're rewarding corporations. I mean, they're propping up these corporations to like let them have some sort of like social responsibility clout. But it's just, yeah, we don't want to assimilate. Queer liberation, trans liberation, that cannot happen under capitalism, can't happen under neoliberalism. We can't have our trans siblings, so many of them like homeless, you know? These are things that neoliberalism creates. We need to be like Cuba. And when I say that, I mean, trans folks are able to receive gender confirmation surgery in Cuba for free. Meanwhile, here I just see day after day like GoFundMe's on Twitter. And so that's just one thing. And I just, this neoliberal, all of these companies, these neoliberal corporate companies that the HRC links up with, and that, you know, say every Pride Month they do a little tweet and change their logo to like a rainbow logo. They profit off of imperialism. They profit off of exploitation of billions of poor people, primarily Black and brown poor people. And why should we fall for their bullshit? All of their practices are exploitative. All of their you know, they're just bad faith actors. They're not doing this because they actually care about our condition, our liberation. And sorry for these dogs, but yeah. Yeah,
it's almost like they wait for a tipping point to happen, and then they're like, oh well, we got to get on this before they overthrow us. And then people see that and they're like, oh look, we have to wait for the companies to endorse it before we can, before real change is made. So boring. It's so, I don't know what else to call it. It's trash, not an opinion. It's like you're fucking brainwashed. Your consent is being manufactured right now.
Yeah, I feel like, that's what the whole assimilationist, that's what assimilationists like seek to accomplish. It's like, oh, well, we've already, let's just strive to have the same thing that straight people have. That let's go with this patriarchal society, this capitalist, domesticated, patriarchal society. What we all have, we can get jobs and we can, live the same life as, this colonial structure has created, and this colonial capitalist culture has created. We have gay marriage now, so why keep fighting? That's it. Why change the whole structure when you can just assimilate to it?
Yeah.
Have either of you checked out this group called Against Equality?
Yeah.
Have you heard?
No, but that sounds really interesting, and it sounds like it sounds like my type of thing.
So you should check out Against Equality. Oh, wait, that's Celine. Oh no, they won't show the book.
Alina, she's in the way.
Okay, well, it's called never mind. It's called Against Equality, Queer Revolution, Not Mere Inclusion.
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of like essays and stuff from people who are like, gay marriage? It's not the end all be all of stuff.
No.
It's definitely worth looking into. There's a Facebook group. It's really inactive, but every now and then someone will post something in there, and
cool.
They have a lot of takes like that where they're like, gay marriage isn't like the end goal here.
Going back to what you said though about the about like how someone was like, oh, do you think that Pete Buttigieg isn't gay enough? This kind of like, in a way, like, yeah, he's like too homonormative and like too assimilationist. Like, look at him. He literally worked for McKinsey, was in the US military, and then fucking got married to like his white gay, like, I don't know what his husband does for a job, but probably works at some corporation. Like, they don't stand for, and they don't represent so much of what queer and trans people are going through around the world, and they represent what these capitalists in power who don't give a shit about us want to see out of us. What they want for us is what, like, if anything, if we're going to exist at all, then we have to play by their rules, and we have to get married, and we have to like just assimilate to corporate America, and we have to construct these like patriarchal norms that we live our lives by. And we know that that's not what being queer and trans is. So like, I obviously don't want it to be like I hate Pete Buttigieg because he's not gay enough or whatever. I hate him for all of the policies that he advocates for and so much of what he stands for. But like, in a way, it's like, yeah, like he's what this is what I see in a lot of like my Black comrades, how they feel towards Obama, like he's playing by the rules of these people who don't give a shit about us. So why should he be held up? It just speaks volumes that out of everyone in our communities, these types of people are being held up,
Yeah. And I think these assimilationists, like homonormative examples like institutions that exist, and shows like Queer Eye, for example, so homonormative. They exist to just erase the real meaning of what being queer means.
Yeah.
It's being queer was like a radical thing. Being gay was a radical thing. Being a lesbian was a radical thing. Like, we wanted to, there was a real strong trend for liberation to overthrow all the structures of oppression and domination that the US represented. And now it's all like, well, let's just why don't we just become who let's be like our enemies. Let's be like our oppressors.
Yeah.
That's why McCarthy went after homosexuals, because they were so involved in left-wing socialist parties and politics. And that was like the threat, was the gays are going to bring socialism to the United States.
Like, that sounds so amazing, but like now I feel like so many of the I feel like the LGBTQ community is just like oversaturated with these like imperialist gays and like
right.
people like neoliberal gays, who like totally they
don't understand their own
solidarity.
Yeah,
and they just have such like
the class analysis is gone. There's no class analysis. There's no
and every time you
solidarity.
back to class analysis, they're like accusing you of being a reductionist, and they're like, oh, I had this conversation with some friends about what emotional labor means on a post I made on Facebook last night, and I was just having like a regular conversation with a friend of mine, and about like managing your emotions and labor, and he was like, well, what do you call it when Black people teach you things? And that's my emotional labor as a Black person, teaching you things about Black people and Black culture so that you can understand racism better. And I hear that, and that is a thing 100%. That's a social burden that people carry. But the term emotional labor was created to talk about your emotions as it relates to capital. I forgot how this was going to tie into what we were just talking about. Class analysis is gone. That's what you said. The class analysis was gone, and so it made me think about that and getting treated like a reductionist when I bring back the class analysis to my politics. The same thing happened when gay marriage. When the Obama administration was like, oh, yep, gays can get married now. We're good people. The White House has a rainbow on it. When just a few years prior, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was like, oh, no, I don't support gay marriage. Like literally the year before. And so you remind people of that in 2016, and they're like, oh, you're a misogynist.
Yeah.
I'm a what? She says she didn't support me getting married, and literally changed her mind within the past 2 years. Now she's running for president, and I'm supposed to just believe that she's going to be consistent because she supports gay marriage now suddenly.
Yeah, and there's also so much nostalgia, I feel like, within the gay community towards Obama, just because gay marriage like passed under him, and like because he does represent that like neoliberal like friendly face. And it's really disappointing, because we know that, again, like his policies were garbage for our community. Like, you think bailing out banks is good for queer and trans people? You think that bombing Yemen and giving more money to Israel than any administration before him is good for queer and trans people in the global South? Like, it's destroying Libya, like all. And okay, that's another thing. Destroying Libya, similar to pinkwashing, destroying Libya was done under the guise of, we care about Libya's women. Hillary and Susan Rice and Samantha Power, all three women, were super vocal about how we need to intervene in Libya because women there. Like, there was this lie, this State Department. There was a State Department lie about Gaddafi like handing out Viagra or something.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, we need to intervene. And it's like, what's happening in Libya now? It's a collapsed state, and there's open air slave markets. Right. And was it really ever because of the women? No. And you only trusted it because these ruling class imperialist women in the US they talked out of their ass, and they convinced you. And like, we can't keep being convinced by these horrible people when their decisions are destroying our siblings' lives all around the world. And it's just, similarly, I was looking through Twitter the other day and I saw BAE Systems, the largest weapons company in Europe, put up a pride post. And I was just like, oh, great. Like, they literally sold $19 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia recently. And they care about us, you know? They have one gay employee that they took a picture of and we're like, you guys, we're doing it. It's just such a slap in the face. It's such a slap in the face, and it's so insulting to our intelligence. And
you guys, we're doing it.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's beyond words. I don't even know what to say.
We're good people. Let's carpet bomb a wedding in Iraq now. Yeah, let's do that.
With the rainbow flag projected on the White House.
Right.
Wow.
I want to make sure, I think you might have touched on this or answered this, but I want to make sure, just to maybe go into a little more, or my questions are kind of all over the place. I apologize. How are pinkwashing and homonationalism commodified? Do you think this makes consumers complicit? How can we talk about complicity when so many companies practice pinkwashing in their business practices?
I mean, pinkwashing, we see, like, I went to LA Pride last year just to document it. Like, I went alone and sober and was just like taking pictures and videos because I was like, this is so disturbing.
You did the right thing.
And yeah, I saw a Wells Fargo ATM that was rainbow. And I was just like, I mean, like, it just takes a simple Google search to know that, like, Wells Fargo invested in the Dakota Access Pipeline, displaced indigenous people, surely queer and trans indigenous people, you know? All of these corporations that I was in San Diego Pride like 2 years ago, I think, and it was like I saw the military marching there, but in addition, I saw a huge HP float, and it was right after I had gotten back from Palestine, and HP is invested. They make facial recognition software that are used at Israeli checkpoints. And HP was trying to claim that, you know, it's happy for LGBTQ folks, and that's just not the case. So, yeah, I just think we see it with so many different types of companies, so many different brands that have contracts with ICE or contracts with the Department of Defense, contracts with Saudi Arabia. Like, so Uber, we know that Uber has like a contract with Saudi Arabia, but Uber was like sponsoring the LA Pride. So it's like, what is happening? You know, like the same people who are funding our like so-called like Pride events are funding these like horrific things all around the world. And like, when we're chanting like and saying that, you know, like a threat to justice, what's the quote? Like, a threat to justice somewhere is a threat to justice anywhere, or whatever. Totally botched that.
An injustice anywhere is justice anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's just like it's all about the money, right? Like, we live in like this hyper capitalist society, and we know that it all comes back to the money. And when certain companies are funding these catastrophic like endeavors, and they're also funding our Pride events, that's just, to me, so heartbreaking, and also just like deeply, deeply disturbing.
So yeah, we're still gonna switch gears. So
yeah, we're all about switching gears.
Keep your wig on. Okay. With the general election coming, I see multiple people, mainly liberals, demanding that we put our support behind Joe Biden in order to defeat Donald Trump. I see this a lot more recently with the Trump administration's stripping of trans rights happening. Do you think the demanding the support for Joe Biden is pinkwashing, and how can we talk about that to our liberal friends?
Yeah, I think it is, like, just because, like, the bar is depressingly low, right? And just because Trump has been super belligerent in like everything he's done doesn't mean that Biden wouldn't be super harmful to communities all around the world. And as it comes, like, as it relates to foreign policy, Democrats, including Biden, have attacked Trump from the right on like China and on Syria and on a bunch of different issues, which is super alarming. And like, we already know that Biden's a war criminal. He whipped up support for the war in Iraq. He was part of the administration that gave more money to Israel than any president ever. He is a sexual predator. He is a segregationist. It's just, and like, again, are we just gonna let ourselves be like totally played? Like, I'm not gonna do it.
They're gonna do it. They're gonna do it again.
Yeah, they're gonna do it.
2016, we're gonna get another 2016, and I'm fully prepared for it. I'm fully prepared for Trump to mop the floor with Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. And
are you
ready for the renewed Russia hysteria, because it's coming?
Oh yeah.
I'm ready. I saw an ad today about I think it was from the Liberty Group, and they're like, oh, Trump is asking China's President Xi for help getting reelected, and I was like, here comes the anti-China again.
I saw that.
Again. Be Russia and China hysteria.
I know, and like, I just don't. People, like, so many people already betrayed their like morals and values in 2016, including myself. Like, I wasn't as political at the time and like totally fell for the lesser of two evils thing, and that's like one of my biggest regrets ever, you know. Like, I will never do that again. Yeah. And like, I just feel like that's like inexcusable, and like, people shouldn't be betraying their values like that. And like, for what, you know? Like, what are the Democrats even doing right now?
Right. Like, keep trying to have that conversation with people where I'm positioning myself as someone who's been. I say I am betraying my values to vote for the Democratic Party. I have nothing in common with them politically. They don't support health care. They don't support rent caps. They love oil. They don't care about green energy. They don't talk about human rights, because it would implicate themselves as the bad guys. And when you like contextualize it like that, people get really defensive of their beliefs, and they're like, oh, I love Elizabeth Warren and I love Hillary Clinton and they're women, and Kamala Harris, and they're so progressive, but they like have taken some of the most conservative positions imaginable. And I am tired of betraying my values as a socialist, and as a gay person, to support for people who not only make money off of like genocide and homelessness and war, but people who don't also see eye to eye. Like, why is Joe Biden is not my ideal candidate just not a good enough answer for people? Why is it that you're endorsing Trump then?
Yeah, no, exactly. I've gotten that response multiple times, that I'm somehow
or if you vote for a third party like Gloria La Riva, then you're automatically voting for Trump. It's like this stupid this really dumb, it's a horrible argument. It's really,
and it's such bullshit, because it's like, someone told me this that I haven't been able to forget. It's like, so if I'm not voting for Biden, then I'm voting for Trump. Does that mean if I'm not voting for Trump, I'm voting for Biden?
Yeah. Right. How come it doesn't work the
How
other way?
does it work? Yeah,
How
exactly.
the other way then?
Also, can we just talk about how 2 of the last 5, so 40% of the last the last 5 U.S. elections have not been determined by the popular vote? It's like, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm not.
We're the only country in the world where the loser wins.
But Bolivia's
it doesn't happen in Russia.
But Evo ran for another term, and that was just super authoritarian of him. So
right.
Only that. Yeah. No. Okay. So what had happened was he ran for a 3rd term, right? And then the Supreme Court of Bolivia said, "Oh no, he's good. He can run again."
Yeah, they approved it.
Has to get, I think it was like over 60% of the popular vote, and he got like 63%.
Yeah,
that's still a massive majority. That's 63% of people who voted in your election voted for Evo Morales, and nope. Nope.
It's the same type of media like manipulations and distortions that they use against Venezuela too. It's like, oh, Maduro didn't, like, he rigged the elections. No, the opposition boycotted the elections.
Right.
The opposition refused to run, and then there was going to be an opposition candidate, and the U.S. threatened to sanction him.
And then we sanctioned him anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's so ridiculous hearing the U.S. talk about elections in other countries. Like, do we not remember Iowa this past year? Like, what a joke. I still don't know who won. Do we know?
Yes, no, there's a definitive answer. Hold on.
The fact that we have to Google this though, like, it's so wrong.
Yeah. And they held off on that on purpose.
Oh yeah.
Right, yeah, to like give Pete like a push. Which he was behind the whole app. He was behind him and his
Shadow,
yeah.
Okay, so this is on Wikipedia. Pete Buttigieg got 14 delegates, and Bernie Sanders got 12. But the first vote, Bernie Sanders got 43,581, and Pete Buttigieg got 37,572.
Oh, okay. So
but
Bernie won.
At the end of it, Buttigieg got 26.2% of the votes, and Bernie got 26.1% of the votes.
How does this make sense? It doesn't make any sense.
It's so undemocratic.
It's just crazy that people, like, especially people within like the queer community, LGBT community, that we think we live in some democracy, and it's not. It's the opposite. It's a bourgeois dictatorship. Yeah. This system only benefits the ruling elite, not us.
I wish we had time to talk about sanctions too, because a lot of these people, all of them support sanctions, which hurt and starve working class people in these countries. It doesn't hurt the governments, it hurts the people. And that, who do you think that's going to affect more in these countries? Yep. It's going to affect people of color, and it's going to affect queers. And it's like you can't keep arguing that I'm voting against my own interests when I vote for third party, because you're literally endorsing genocide when you say, you know what, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden.
No, you really are. And people don't, it's never framed that way because it sounds so extreme, but it's true. Like, so he would support the Venezuela coup. He wouldn't have withdrawn those troops from northern Syria, even though the US is still occupying Syria and like sanctioning Syria and stealing Syria's oil and stuff. But he wouldn't have withdrawn a couple troops from northern Syria. He seems to be more anti-China, more anti-Russia. We know all of the Democrats constantly like make fun of Trump for meeting with Kim Jong-un. Yeah, they're like, oh, Trump met with Kim Jong-un, and it's like, that's a good thing because the fucking war has been going on for 70 years and it's still not over. So
a war we helped perpetuate.
Exactly. And continue to perpetuate. We're still occupying the Korean Peninsula. And these sanctions are killing people, killing children in the DPRK, killing people in Venezuela. Yeah. And the CEPR report, the Center for Economic and Policy Research or whatever, that came out said that the sanctions on Venezuela killed 40,000 Venezuelans in 1 year, said that that LGBTQ folks were like disproportionately affected. And that shouldn't be surprising because we already know that like the LGBTQ community is like consistently among the poorest in society. So when we're sanctioning Iran, but then all of these like neoconservative, disingenuous idiots say like, oh, but Iran like oppresses gay people, even though they don't care at all. Like, you really think Tom Cotton cares about that? Then we're like harming the LGBTQ community in Iran. We're killing queer and trans Iranians. I don't want to kill them. I don't want, even if they're not queer and trans, I don't want my government murdering people, whether it's covertly or overtly around the world. I don't want that. That's not a normal thing. And most governments aren't doing that. Yeah. So it's time for people to really put this, in those extreme terms, to wake them up and let them know that, like, not in our names, like, really not in being in Palestine, on the ground in Palestine, seeing $10 million a day that the US is sending to Israel, seeing what that does. I was waking up in the middle of the night to watch for bulldozers and tanks coming to demolish defenseless people's homes. So that's what that's going to. And that's happening every fucking day in Palestine. And that's exactly what the money is going to. That's what the Caterpillar bulldozers are going to. So, yeah, I just totally disagree with the framing that we need to vote for Biden or that it's the lesser of two evils. Like, I'm rejecting that, and like, I'm not falling for it.
Right.
Not voting for Joe Biden whatsoever.
None of us are. I'm voting for Gloria LaRiva and Leonard Peltier.
Yeah, hell yeah.
If they get on the ballot in our state, there was like a petition going around, which we should totally link in the video below.
Yeah.
So that we can get her on we can get them on the ballot. They're really nice.
Yeah, we had them on the show not that long ago. So BDS, I think BDS it could be used in a great way to counter, pinkwashing. Have you had any experience with that? BDS being used to counter all these, these narratives, like especially regarding pinkwashing in Israel and in the US?
Yeah, I mean, we should absolutely be boycotting and showing up outside of these like Israeli like LGBTQ film festivals, like unacceptable. Boycotting, I mean, there's a whole boycott list online, but it's really grotesque how much Israel tries to push this narrative. And it's also really scary how it's come home here to like the anti-BDS laws throughout the US are proof that the movement actually poses a threat to Israeli apartheid. And we all know that apartheid states fall and Israel will inevitably fall. So it's on us to lift up the voices of Palestinians and advocate for a one-state solution where, everyone is equal and
how it was before colonization.
Exactly. Get rid of this settler colonial state that's like literally not just occupying Palestine, but occupying Syria, bombing Syria, constantly fucking with Lebanon, like bombing Iraq, instigating shit with Iran. It's people try to make it seem like Iran is the biggest threat to the regional security. It's obviously the US and Israel and Saudi Arabia. And the other Gulf. Yeah, exactly. Iran is providing like support to resistance groups across the region that are fighting back against these against imperialism.
Gears again. But this question has to do with something that we've really seen a lot of discourse regarding privilege. I think it's a very destructive and it's a very distracting and destructive discourse that we see. So one of your recent posts on social media, you posted about why we need to stop engaging in privilege discourse, especially regarding white privilege. Can you explain why using the word privilege is not only a misuse of the word, but it's also a misdiagnosis of the actual problem, which is white pathology?
Yeah. I was really introduced to this subject because I always had felt like privilege was kind of like a flimsy word and it doesn't really hold up enough. And I feel the same way about like the word ally. You know, I want someone who's like a comrade or someone who's just something more substantive. And the ally thing feels just insufficient. And so I was at this forum just to talk about how none of us are free until Black trans women are free. And one of the speakers was saying that we need to stop talking about white privilege, or stop talking about using our privilege and start talking about divesting from power. And I think that that is way more substantive and actually, you know, shows that you're willing to sacrifice something. You're willing to divest from a structure that is like inherently unjust. I think using your privilege implies that like you maintain that that like power dynamic, you know? It's like, well, you'll still have that privilege. You just got to use it, you know? Like, no, fuck that whole thing. I don't want this power that is this white power that governs like literally everything. I just don't want that to exist, you know? I don't want to just use it to help a couple people here and there. Fuck that. No, I want to use it to like create the conditions for like total liberation of everyone.
Right. And I think also it plays into the assimilationist like mindset. Like, oh, well, we just got to like get what these, you know, these elite white rich people have, and then we'll be fine. It's the same thing with homonormativity. It's like, oh, well, if we just adapt or assimilate to heterosexual norms and ways of living, then we can get there too. It's a delusion. It's a total delusional mindset, and I think it totally takes away from the actual problem, which is, you know, white pathology is at the root cause of all these issues. You know, I think it's just a silly misuse of the word privilege, especially when you say like white privilege, because white people aren't, because it totally takes away the class analysis, right? So there's more poor white people here. There's more poor white people on food stamps here. There's more poor white people in prisons, again, because we make up the majority here. But like, if there really was a white privilege system, then there'd be no poor white people. There'd be no white people in prison. Climate change wouldn't hurt white people, but it is, and it's a whole like Eurocentric system that's destroying the planet.
Yeah, and it's also just kind of like feels individualistic, you know, which it doesn't feel like you're thinking beyond these like individual instances of like, if you like, I don't even know what a good example is, but it just like, we need to be right now, especially we need to be connecting all of these dots, and like we need to be understanding that like white pathology and like this white supremacy is like connected to everything, you know, like literally everything. The US foreign policy is white supremacists, you know, it just is. The reason that we're sanctioning Venezuela is white supremacists. The reason that we're sanctioning Iran is white supremacists. Like these, and it comes back to these like structural issues of like the dynamic between capitalism and like race, and I just think that we can't keep thinking about things so individualistically, because that's exactly what neoliberalism wants us to, the way that neoliberalism wants us to think, you know. They want us to think that all of these things are happening just in a vacuum, like disconnected from each other. But no, there's like this system that actually like connects them all.
Yeah. And I think even like the use of the word white supremacy is still not fully accurate. You know, because there's nothing supreme about enslaving, colonizing, robbing, and oppressing others. I think like more of the correct term is like white domination, white power structure. Those are the things we need to talk about. Those are real. Those are real institutions. There's institutions, because that's how they can institute racism, and imperialism is through power, which you know, it's all through
domination. Yeah, white domination is a really good term. I'm gonna start using that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely watched another show called Bro Diallo, the Bro Diallo show.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about this, and it's so right. I think the language is, and the words that we use is so important, because it just puts everything into such a better context, and you can
especially after like decades of liberals co-opting language to understand radical ideas, and then using them for their own like political and social gain. I mean when you
I'm looking at you, intersectionality.
Yeah, right. And emotional labor.
Yeah.
And emotional labor. Yeah, I know.
Kimberly Crenshaw didn't do that, so you could do this.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but Ryan, we really appreciate your time. You know, we greatly appreciate you coming on the show and talking about all these important issues and topics that don't get covered enough, especially these issues that are so pervasive in our own community, and they need addressing. So we're really glad that you were able to do that with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, like, let people know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, my Twitter is queer a la mode, ALAMODE. You all know how to spell queer.
I hope, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. We look forward to having you on again soon, for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you were talking to me, because I can tangent sometimes.
Yeah.
Thanks for the
Oh my God, I want to hear more tangents, please.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, tune in every week, and you will.
Hell yeah.
Well, thank you.